Okay, so I have already created two classes. The first one is a class A, and there is another class which is class B. These are basically two design classes, and in the right portion, I have created the tester class. Basically, I will show you how can I access the static variables inside a single class, and how can I access the static variable of one class inside another class. Suppose there is a static variable in class A, is it possible to access the static variable in class B on? So we will basically see the different approaches or different ways how can we access the static property. So let's first focus on one class. Suppose this is my class A, and inside this class there are currently two variables. I have already commented on the first slide, so I'm assuming that there is only one static variable, and the name of the static variable is x. So there is a static variable, and the value of the static variable is 20. Okay, and there is a constructor, and inside the constructor we can see that there is a local variable which is also x, and the value which is stored inside the local variable is 4. And inside the constructor, I'm basically printing the variable x in different ways. At first, I'm just printing the variable just using its name x, and in the second line, I have called the variable with respect to the this operator or this keyword, and for the third output, I'm basically calling the variable with respect to the class name. Okay, so if we check out the tester class, we can see that inside the tester class, at first I have created an object of class A, which is A1. We know that if there is a static variable inside the class, the variable will be directly declared and initialized when we compile that class, right? We know that static variables are not dependent on an object. They are not dependent on an object. So basically, whenever we create a class, the static variables are declared and initialized, and there is no relation between the static variables and the object. That means it is not necessary to create an object to access the static properties. Okay, so there is a static variable x, and currently the value of the static variable x is 20. So inside the tester class, I have created an object of a class, and we know that when we create an object, we call the constructor. So this is my constructor. Inside the constructor, because of calling the constructor while creating the object, it will go to the constructor. That means it will execute this portion, and it will basically execute each and every lines which are inside the constructor. So let's trace it. Inside the constructor, at first we can see that there is a local variable x, and the current value of local variable x is 4. Okay. So what will be the first output of this constructor? Here I am printing just x. We know that if we are calling a variable just using its name, at first it will search for the local variable. It will check whether I have any local property within this scope. So as I'm calling the variable x, and we can see that there is a local variable x. So if I'm calling the variable x, it will definitely search for the local variable. As I have a local variable x, so definitely the value of the first output will be 4, because we are calling the local variable, and as I have a local variable, so definitely it will access the local property, and its current value is 4, so the first output will be 4. Okay. Then in the next line, I am calling this dot x. We usually know that this means basically the object I'm currently working with. So for this constructor, at first I need to know that what is actually inside this keyword. So this is basically inside the constructor, and we know that the constructor is run basically when we call or create an object. So whenever I'm creating the A1 object, for this A1 object creation, the constructor portion is executed. That means inside the constructor, if I mention this keyword is basically holding the memory location of A1 object. That means if I print A1 object from the tester class, and if I print this keyword from the design class, both the memory locations will be same, because this is here currently the memory location of A1 object. So in the second line, I'm calling this dot x. That means I want to access the instance variable, or I want to access the x variable which is inside the memory location of A1 object. So at first I need to check that do I have any instance variable. We can see that inside the class there is no instance variable. There is an instance variable, but I have commented this line. That means there is no instance variable, but there is a static variable. So what will happen, though maybe some of you are assuming that it will show an error because we don't have any instance variable, but we in the last class I have already shown this, that if we call a static variable with respect to this, what will happen, it will basically search for the variable within the instance scope or within that memory location. So as I am calling the variable x with respect to this, it will at first search, do I have any instance variable? But we can see that there is no instance x. So what will happen, if we don't have any instance variable x, then it will search whether I have any static variable. We can see that yes, I have a static variable x and the current value of the static variable is 20. That means instead of showing any error, this line will basically print 20, the value of the static variable. That means we know that to access the static property, it is a conventional way that we have to call the class name. We have to call the static variable with respect to a class name, but this is not mandatory. If we call a static variable with respect to an object, it will work if that variable exists. Okay, either the variable will be there as a static variable, or there should be a variable x as an instance variable. So normally if I call this dot x, at first it will search if I have any instance variable. If it has an instance variable, then definitely it will print the instance property. But if I don't have an instance variable, instead of showing any error, it will check whether it has any static property. As inside this class I have a static variable x, which is holding currently 20. So instead of showing any error, it will print the value of the static variable, which is 20. Okay, then let's check out the third line, and it is very basic line. I am calling the static variable x with respect to class A, and we know that static variables are commonly called with respect to the name of the class. That means the third output will also be 20. For the first one, again, if we call a variable just using its name, it will at first search for the local scope. If it has any local variable x, then it will definitely uh, access the local variable. As the constructor currently has a local variable x, so that's why the first output is 4. For the second one, I am calling the x variable with respect to an object. But we know that normally we call a static variable with respect to a class. But here what is happening, if I am calling the x variable with respect to an object, so at first it will search that if it will check if I have any as instance variable x inside the class. But we can see that we don't have any instance variable, but we have a static variable. As we have a static variable, so instead of showing any error, it will access the static variable. Okay, and for the last one, I am calling the variable with respect to the name of the class. That means definitely it won't search for the local variable, it won't search for the instance variable, it will directly access the static property. Okay, so suppose there is no static variable now. Okay, so let me first compile and run this code, and let's check if our outputs are correct. The first output should be 4 and the remaining two outputs should be 20. So let's compile the code and run it. So the first output is 4 and the last two outputs are 20. Okay, so now let's comment out the static portion and uncomment the instance portion. Suppose currently I have an instance x. Currently I don't have any static variable x. Okay, so the first line will be 4 again because I have a local variable, so definitely it will access the local x. So the first output will be 4. There is no issue. Okay, what will happen to the next output? So here I am calling this dot x. That means I want to access the instance variable, but and currently I have an instance variable x. So again there is no issue. We already know about this, that if we call a variable with respect to this, that means it will access the instance variable. So as I have an instance variable x inside class A, so definitely it will access the x variable, so the value will be 100. ওকে, সো এখানে কি আছে, আমার কাছে একটা ইনস্ট্যান্স ভ্যারিয়েবল আছে x, দ্যাট মিন্স আমি যেহেতু এখানে কল করছি x কে with respect to this, that means it will access the instance property and the current value of the instance variable is 100, so the second output will be 100. Okay, what about the third output? Okay. Some of you are maybe assuming that if as I'm calling a dot x, maybe similar to this dot x, it will access the instance variable. But no, let me first compile this code. Okay. Okay. After compiling this code, we can see that there is an error. If you read the error message, it is written that a non-static variable x cannot be referenced from a static context. Okay, what does this mean? X is basically an instance property. That means it is a non-static property. So it is written that a non-static variable x cannot be referenced from a static context. We call a static variable with respect to the name of the class. So here x is an instance variable and I want to access an instance variable with respect to the name of the class, which is not possible. X is a non-static property and I want to call this property with the reference of a static property, okay, which is not possible. That means the reverse portion is possible, okay, the opposite portion is possible. That means if there is any static variable and if you call that a static variable with respect to this is possible, because if we don't have any instance variable, it will access the static variable. But if we have an instance variable and if I want to call the instance variable with respect to a static context, it is not possible, okay. So the third output, this one basically is an error. So if I just comment on the third line and run the first two lines, so the first output, okay, so there is another issue. Okay, let me just comment on this portion first. This is a part of the class B, so we won't be executing this portion. So let's compile this again and run this. At first we will focus on a single class, then we will check how to access the variables using two different classes. Okay, so as the first output is, it is a local property, so it will definitely be 4. And for the second one, as I'm calling the static instance variable with respect to this keyword, so definitely as I have a static variable and the current value of the static variable is 100, that's why the second output is 100. Okay, so what will happen if I don't have any local variable? Okay, if I don't, currently I don't have any local variable, I only have an instance variable. So what will happen for this one? We know that if we call a variable just by using its name, it will search for the local variable within its scope. So it will do the same thing for this line. At first it will search for the variable within its scope, that means within the scope of the constructor. But currently I don't have any local variable. So what will happen? It will search for an instance variable or the static property. Okay, I don't know if you guys remember or not. In the last class I mentioned that a same class can't have a variable with the same name, but one will be of instance property and another will be of static property. That means this combination is not possible, that you have a class A and inside that class you have one x which is an instance x, and you have another x which is a static x. This is not possible. Because why it is not possible? Suppose if you write like this, int x equals to 4, and suppose inside the same line you write string x equals to 5, right? We can't do this because x is already declared. There is a variable which is x, which is of integer data type, so it is same. So you can't have a same variable name, but you can't just change the consider one variable as an instance variable and another variable as a static variable. Simply a class can't have same variable as an instance variable or and as a static variable. That means if there is any static x, there can't be any instance x. If there is any instance x, there can't be any static x. So one will be possible, either there will be an instance variable or there will be a static variable. Okay, so let's comment out this line once again. So for this one, I want to access the variable x and I don't have any local x, so it will check whether I have any instance x or static x. Okay, if I have an instance x, then it will access the instance variable, but if I have any static x, then it will access the static variable. That means currently for this portion, as I have an instance x, so definitely the output will be 100. But if I comment out this line and uncomment this line, so currently I have a static variable x, so for this one the first output will be 20. Okay, so what is the procedure, or what is the steps of searching for a variable? At first, if we are calling a variable just by using its name, it will at first search for the local variable, then it will search for either the instance variable or the static variable, which the currently which variable basically currently inside the class. Either it will be static or it will be instance. If you call a variable with respect to an object, then it won't search for the local variable, it will directly search for the instance property. But if there is no instance property, then it will check if I have any static property for this one. Okay, for this one. So for this one, if I don't have any currently I don't have any instance property, but it won't show any error. Why? Because though I don't have any instance property, I have a static property, so it will access, or it will print 20. But if I have an instance property, then it will directly access the instance property. But for the last line, we can't call an instance variable with respect to a class. If I call a dot x, that means x needs to be a static variable. Okay, you can't call a instance variable with respect to the name of a class. Okay, so this is basically for one class. So if you guys understood this portion for one class, then I guess it will be easier for you to understand the same thing if multiple classes are there. So there can be 2 classes or there can be 3 classes. Basically, these portions are important for your tracing problem, because you need to know from where you can access the static property, or how can you access the static property, or which time you have to access the instance property, local property, or the static property. So let's check the next one. Okay. Next class, and this is another class, and in the class I have currently 2 variables. I have commented one portion. Both variable names are y. So currently I have a static variable y, and the value of the static variable y is 20 and 200. Okay, and there is a local variable, there is a method which is method a, and inside that method there is a local variable y. Okay, so let's check out this line. But we know that if I want to access, or if I want to execute method b, as this is an instance method, definitely I have to create an object. So let's comment out these 2 lines from the tester class. Okay, so second one, I have created an object of b class, which is b1. Okay, so as I have created an object of b class, before we know that it will be the same for the static variable. We know that before creating an object, whenever we just compile the class, the static variable will be initialized. Okay, so that means it is not mandatory to create an object to access the static property. So suppose I have a static variable y, and its current value is 200. Okay, after that I am creating an object b1, and we know that if we call if we create an object, it will call the constructor. But we can see that there is no constructor inside the class. That means it will call the default constructor. Okay, so it will execute the default constructor, and after executing and the body of the default constructor, the object creation part is done. Then let's check out the third line, which is basically a method call, and I'm calling this method, which is method a, with respect to b1 object. Okay, so at first you need to know that whenever we call a method, we basically pass a memory location. Okay, suppose this one is currently, let's remove this portion first. Okay, let's comment on this line. I will pass the reference a bit later, but at first let's check it out. So I have called the method a with respect to b1 object. So we know that whenever we call a method, it will go to the body of the method, and while While executing the body of the method, it will take a memory location, and that memory location's value will be stored inside this keyword. That means in this keyword, the memory location which is stored inside this keyword is basically the memory location of B1 object. Okay, so let's execute method A. So inside method A there is a local variable, and after that I am printing this dot y. Okay, so I want to access the variable y, which is an instance variable, and I am calling the variable with respect to this. That means I am accessing the variable with respect to the B1 object. Okay, so at first it will search, it will check if I have any instance variable, but no, currently this class doesn't have any instance variable. But in our previous example we saw that even if we don't have any instance property, if there is any static property, we can access that property with respect to or with reference to an object. That means here if I call this dot y, then definitely it will print or it will access the static property, and currently the value of the static x is 200. So the output of the first line, it will be 200. Okay, then next line, a dot x. Okay, so the first question is, can I call a static variable of a different class inside the current class? That means I want to access the static variable x, and I'm calling the static variable with respect to a. That means I am calling the static variable of a class inside class B. Is it possible? Yes, it is possible. Why it is possible? Because our static property is not dependent on an object. That means we don't need to create an object. If we have a class, if we have that class, if we have a class, and if we have compiled that class, that means the static variable has already initialized, already declared and initialized. That means I can access a static property of one class in another class. So currently, though I am inside a class B, but I can definitely access the static property of class A. Okay, so I'm calling a dot x. So at first I need to check if we have any static x in class A, because we know that we can't access an instance variable with respect to the name of a class. That means class A should have a static variable x to execute this line. So let's check if we have any static x. Yes, currently class A has a static variable x. So if we execute this line, this output, then the current value of x is 20. So the output of this line will be 20. Okay, that means we can access the static property of one class in another class. This is possible. It is not an impossible task, but it will be possible if that property is there inside that class. If there is no static variable, then it's not possible to access that variable. Okay. Okay, then last one, I want to call b dot y. That means b dot y means the static y of B class. We can see that yes, there is a static variable y. So if we call this variable, so this output will be 200 again. So let's compile this portion and check if the outputs are 20, 200, 20 and 200. Compile. Okay. So there were some line. Let's comment out this portion as we have already executed this portion. So I'm just commenting out this, and let's compile and run the code once again to check our latest outputs. Okay, so the latest outputs are 220 and 200. Okay, so now what will happen if I pass a variable or if I pass an object? Okay, one more thing, what will happen if if the static variable is not inside that class? Okay, so we know that suppose there is there is an instance variable x inside that class. If I compile this class and run that code, so definitely it will show an error. It will show an error inside that line. The error is the same. It's non-static property cannot be referenced from a static property. Okay, we can't access an instance variable with respect to the name of the class. Okay, this is not possible. Okay, so let's pass an object while calling this method A. Okay, so method A is called with respect to B1 object, and suppose I am currently passing A1 as a parameter while calling these methods. As I have passed a1 as an argument, so I need to consider, or I need to take a parameter which will be of definitely type A, because a1 is an object of a class. So let's take a parameter. The data type of the parameter will be a, and suppose the name of the parameter is obj. Okay. Also, one thing, can anyone tell me, is it possible to call this dot x? Will it show any error, or will it produce any output? কোনো আউটপুট আসবে নাকি এটা এরর দিবে? বলেন তো কি হচ্ছে? Is it possible to call this dot x? Currently I am inside method A, and method A is called with respect to b1 object.
ম্যাম এক্স ভ্যারিয়েবল তো নাই।
আচ্ছা দেখেন, এক্স ভ্যারিয়েবল কিন্তু এখানে নেই। অবভিয়াসলি আমি এখানে কি করছি, আমি হচ্ছে this dot x কল করছি, দ্যাট মিনস আই এম কলিং দ্য ভ্যারিয়েবল x with respect to b1 object, but currently I don't have any x variable inside b class. That means definitely it would it's not possible to access any x variable. But if I write obj dot a, what will happen? Obj is basically an object of a class, and if I call obj dot x, that means it will access the instance variable of a class. Basically it will access the instance variable which is inside a1 object or a1 memory location. So at first I need to check if that class has any instance x. So we can see that there is no instance x inside class A. Okay, so if, as I don't have any instance x, but we know that if we don't have any instance property, it won't show any error. It will basically search for the static variable. If I have any static variable, then it will access the static property, but if I don't have any static variable, then it will show an error. So as I have any static as I have a static variable 20, that means if I call obj dot x, it will access the static variable of a class. That means look, here we can access the static variable with respect to a. Sometimes we can access the static variable with respect to this. Sometimes we can access the static variable just using its name, or we can use that variable using any other parameter name if the parameter holds the memory location of a certain object. Okay, so let's compile this code and run the output. Okay, let's compile it once again. Okay, so these are the outputs: 20, 200, 20 and 20. Okay, so these things are important for your tracing. In your coding, these portions are not that much important, but for your tracing you need to know when to access which variable. If you are not sure that which time you need to access the local variable, which time you need to access the instance or static variable, then that will be a problem for to solve the tracing problem. Okay, so I have shown some different steps, or I have called that a variable inside a method, inside a constructor. So at your home you can just create another class, suppose class C. Then inside the class C you can call the local variable or the instance or the static variable in different portions of the class, and then you can check which variables is possible to access in which scope. ওকে, এই জিনিসটা বাসায় একটু ট্রাই করে দেখবেন। ডিফারেন্ট জায়গায় হচ্ছে ভ্যারিয়েবলগুলো অ্যাসাইন করে দেখবেন যে কোনটা কল করা যাচ্ছে আর কোনটা কল করা যাচ্ছে। So if any of you have any question related to this portion, you can ask, but if you don't have any question, then we will solve the tracing problem. Okay, and here are two lines in the tester class. These are very basic. So here I have called x variable with respect to a1 object. That means it will search for the instance. If it doesn't have any instance, then the output will be 20, and for the second output it will be 20 as well, because I am directly calling the static variable. Okay, so if any of you have any question, you can ask, or if you don't have any question, so let's solve a tracing problem. Can anyone tell me আপনাদের ল্যাব ক্লাসে কোন ট্রেসিংটা দেখানো হয়েছে? একটু বলতে পারবেন আপনাদের ক্লাস ওয়ার্কে কোনটা দেখানো হয়েছে? I am planning to show an ungraded tracing problem. So you can tell me if any of you want any other problems that you want me to solve. Okay, so let me first open the assignment. Where is the assignment? Okay, so this is the assignment. আমাকে একটু দেখে বলেন তো। Okay, so first thing, this is an ungraded task 5 of your lab assignment 5. Okay, so there is a class. The name of the class is a trace task. Let's first check what are the properties inside that class. So we can see in line number 2, there is a static variable x. There are two instance variables y and z. There is a constructor, there is a method A and method B. Basically, there are multiple properties. There are static property, there are some instance property, there is a constructor and two different methods. So we know that I have already mentioned that the static variables are basically declared and initialized before creating any object. That means the very first thing I have to do, I have to create a column for the static variable, and inside that column I have to store the static property. Okay, so as I have a static variable x, I have created a column for the static variable. Suppose this is the location, or this is the column where I will store the static properties. As I have an static variable x, so this is the column for x. Okay, one more thing, as this is a static variable, instead of creating the column, just instead of mentioning the just variable name, you have to, it's better to mention the class name dot variable name. Okay, if you just mention x, maybe sometimes you will get confused that okay, maybe this is my instance property or this is a local property. So if there is any static property, instead of mentioning just the name of that property, mention class name dot the name of that property. So as this is a static property, we have to call that property with respect to the name of the class, and name of the class is trace task. So I will create a column for trace task dot x. So this is my variable. This is the static variable, and the value of the static variable is currently 3. 3. Okay. So I have already created the static property. Okay. Then I need to check for the tester code, and inside the tester code we know that we can create multiple objects. So from the first line, inside the first line we can see that I have created an object which is t1. So as I have created an object, we know that if we create an object, we have to allocate a memory location for that object. So let's create a column for the t1 object. Suppose this is the t1 object, and I'm assuming the memory location is button. Okay, at first I allocated the memory location for t1 object, and which is button. Okay, then the second task is we have to create a copy of the instance property inside that memory location. So we can see that there are two instance variables, one is y and another one is z. So let's create a column for y and one column for z. We know that we won't initialize the variable now. At first it will call the constructor, and before executing the body of the constructor, it will initialize the variable with the default values. Okay. So I have created a column for I have created a copy of the instance variable. Now it will call the constructor. So from the tester class we can see that whenever I am calling the constructor, I am passing 4 as an argument. That means this 4 will be stored inside the parameter z. So obviously I have to create a column for the constructor. So suppose this is the column for my constructor, and this constructor is a parameterized constructor. So I have created a column as trace task and the name of the data type of the parameter. Okay, and the name of the parameter is z. So this is my parameter or the local variable, and the value I have passed while calling the constructor is 4. That means 4 will be stored inside the variable z. Okay, so now I have to execute the body of the constructor, but before executing the body of the constructor, I have to initialize the instance variables with the default values. So the default value of y is 5 and the default value of z is 2. So currently I have two z, one is an instance z and another one is my local z. Okay, so now let's execute line number 6. In line number 6, I am accessing this dot z equals to z. At first, you need to know what is this here. Okay, we know that I have called this constructor, this highlighted constructor for the T1 object. That means whenever I am going to the constructor, the memory location of T1 object will be stored inside the keyword this. That means here, this is basically the memory location of T1 object, or this is basically the button location. Okay, so as I'm calling this dot x, that means definitely it will access the instance variable of Barda, which is the z variable, and the current value of z is 2. So I have to update this variable. How will I update it? Equals to z, that means the local variable. So the current local variable of z is 4, so the instance variable will be updated to 4. Previously it was 2, now it is 4. Okay. Then line number 7, x plus equals to 2. So as I am currently inside the constructor, at first I will search for the local variable inside that scope, right? So as this is my local, as I don't have any local variable x, then it will search if I have any instance variable or any static variable x. As we can see that there is no local variable x, instance variable x, so definitely it will access the static variable. That means I want to update the static variable. Currently the value of the static variable is 3, and after adding 2 to it, it's basically it will be updated from 3 to 5. Okay, then line number 8, this dot y. So first thing, this dot y means definitely the instance y, this one. I want to update this y. X minus this dot x. X is currently the static x, as I don't have any local x or an instance x. So the static variable x is currently 5. 5 minus this dot z. This dot z is 4. So basically 1, and this 1 will be stored inside the instance y. Okay. So I have just executed line number 8. That means I have executed the body of the constructor. Why have I come to the constructor's body? Because the constructor was called while creating the first object. That means the first object creation line is done. This one. This portion I have just executed this line. Now I have to execute the next line. Okay. In the next line, I have created another object which is T2. That means again I have to allocate a memory location for that object. So let's first create a column for T2 object, and let's allocate Gulshan memory location for the T2 object. Okay, T2 এর জন্য আমি এখানে একটা memory location allocate করলাম. Okay, so after allocating a memory location, we know that the second step is that we have to create a copy of the instance variable. Okay, one thing, though I have created another object, but I don't have to reinitialize the static variable. Okay, you don't have to reinitialize the static variable with 3 again, because we know that static variable is a property of a class. It is not dependent on an object. It doesn't mean that as I have created another object, I have to initialize the static variable with 3 again. You don't have to do that. Okay, you have to declare and initialize the static variable at the very beginning of the class. Okay, whenever you just execute the class, before creating an object, you have to allocate allocate a column, or you can mention allocate a memory location for the static variable, and inside that location you have to declare and initialize the static variable. Okay, so we have to create a copy of the instance variable for the second object T2. So the second object is inside memory location Gulshan, and we have two instance variable y and z. So let's create two columns. The first one is y and second one is for z. Then we know we have to call the constructor, and here I am calling the constructor and passing to. As I have called the constructor, so let's create a column for the constructor, just like we have created a column inside Banda location. So this is my constructor's column, and there will be a local variable or a parameter set, and as I have passed 2 while creating T2 object, so the value of z will be currently 2. Okay, এই লাইন পর্যন্ত এক্সিকিউট করি. Okay, so now I have to execute these 3 lines, but before executing the body, I have to initialize the instance variables with the default values. So the default value of y is 5 and z is 2. Okay, So let's execute line 6. This dot z equals to z. Again, this dot z means the instance z, and I have to update the value with I have to replace the value with the local z's value, and local z's value is also 2. That means 2 will be replaced with 2. Now line number 7, x plus equals to 2. So I don't have any local x, I don't have any instance x, so definitely x will be the static x. So currently the value of the static variable is 5. So after updating it, the value will be 7. Okay. Okay, so let's check line number 8. This dot y. So this dot y means the instance y. This one, Gaussian's instance y. I have to update this value. X minus this dot z. X is currently 7 and this dot z is currently 2. So 7 minus 2 is 5. That means this dot y will be, it was previously 5 and now it will be 5 once again. So I just have executed the body of the constructor for the second object. That means I have executed this line. Okay. So let's execute the next line. I'm calling method A with respect to T1 object. T1 object is basically Barda memory location. That means I have to create a column for method A inside this memory location. So let's create a column for method A. Suppose this is my column for method A, and method A is a parameterized method. That's why I have mentioned the data type of the parameter, which is integer. Okay. So while creating the method A, while calling the method A, I am passing 3 as an argument. So 3 will be stored inside this parameter, which is x. So obviously I have to create a column for x here. So this is my x, and the value of the x will be currently 3. Okay. So now I have to execute the overall body or these lines of method A. So let's execute the first line, line number 11. This dot y. Okay. So again, what is this here? Currently method A is called with respect to T1 object. So যেহেতু method এটা T1 object respect call করা হয়েছে, as method A is called with respect to T1 object, that means inside method A, if you mention this will indicate the memory location of T1 object, or in short it will indicate the memory location but. Okay. Okay, so this dot y means the instance y of Barda. That means which is currently 1. I have to update this variable. How will I update it? X plus this dot y. Okay, so currently I am inside method A, and I have a local x. Okay, I have a local x, and the value of the local x is 3. So 3 plus this dot y. This dot y is currently 1. So 3 plus 1 is 4. And trace task dot x, which is the static x, means 7. So 7 plus 4 is 11, and 11 will be stored inside this dot y, the instance y. So the variable of the instance y is updated from 1 to 11. Then line number 12. Okay, x equals to this dot z plus 4. I have a local x, so this will be updated. This dot z is this one, which is currently 4, and 4 plus 4 is 8. Okay, so the value of x will be 8. Now this trace task dot x, that means I want to access the static variable, and how will I update it? This dot y, which is currently 11. 11 minus x is currently 8. So 11 minus 8, it will be 3, and 3 will be stored inside the static variable. That means the value of the static variable is currently 3. Okay, so let's print the first 3 outputs. At first x, I have a local x which is currently 8. So the first output is 8. Then this dot y is currently 11. So the second output is 11. And lastly, trace task dot x is my static x, and it is currently 3. So the third output is 3. Okay. Okay. So a method কাজ I have executed a method A. Then I have to execute the next line where I have called method A. So this is the line where I have called the method A. Now I have to execute the next line. Okay. So here I have called method B, but there is a variable initialized before the method call, and we know that if there is any variable initialization before the method call, that means the method will return something. Okay, so as this res variable is inside the tester class, so let's create a column for the res variable here. Okay, this is my res variable. Why have I created the res variable inside here? Because this is not an instance property, this is not a static property, this is basically a property of the tester class. That's why I have created a column for the res variable. Okay, the value of the res variable is dependent on this method call. So I want to call method B with respect to T2 object, and T2 means Gaussian. So that means I have to create a column for method B inside this Gaussian memory location. So let's create a column for method B. Suppose this is my method B, and method B is taking two parameters. Okay, so whenever I'm calling method B with respect to T2 object, that means inside method B, this will represent the memory location of T2 object. But whenever I'm calling method B, I'm also passing the memory location of T1 object. মানে দুইটা জিনিসই করছি, আমি T2 এর রেসপেক্টে কল করছি আর হচ্ছে T1 টাকে পাস করছি. I am calling the method with respect to T2 object and I am passing the memory location of T1 as an argument. Okay, and I am also passing an integer 5. So this is my method B, and as I have passed one object which is a trace task and one integer, so let's mention the parameter here. The first parameter is trace task and the second parameter is int. Okay, it's not mandatory for you to mention the parameter here, but we know that we can have method overloaded methods inside the class, so it is better for you if you mention the parameter. Okay, suppose there is another method B, but the parameters are different there, so if you don't mention the parameter, then maybe while solving the problem you might make any mistake. Okay, so instead of accessing this or updating this method, you mistakenly access the overloaded method. So it's better to mention the parameter data type, but again this is not mandatory. Okay, so this is the column for my method A. Method B, so this is the overall column. So let's pass the values. At first I am passing T1, so T1 will be stored inside T parameter. That means I have to create a column for T, and another name of the another parameter is Z. So T1 will be stored inside T, and T1 basically means the memory location which is button. That means inside T I am passing button location, and 5 is stored inside the variable Z. Okay, because the second parameter is 5. Okay, so inside, let's execute the body of this method. At first, inside the method, there we can see that there is a local y. So let's create another column for the local y, and the current value of the local y is 2. Okay, then execute line number 80. T.z. Okay, T means button location, and T.z means I have to access the instance Z which is inside button memory location. So do I have an instance variable? Yes, I have an instance variable. That means I have to access this, or I have to update this Z variable. Okay, how will I update this? This dot x. Okay, what is this here? This is basically that object for which object method B is called. Okay, so method B is called with respect to T2 object. That means basically I am inside method B, and inside method B if I call this is basically Gaussian memory location. So here this dot Z means the instance Z of Gaussian object. That means 2. Okay, so I want to update the instance variable of button location by using the instance variable of Gaussian location. So this dot Z is basically 2, and 2 plus y, I have a local y and which is currently 2. So 2 plus 2 is 4, and this 4 will be stored inside the instance variable of the set which is inside button memory location. Okay, so previously it was 4, so now currently it will be updated to 4 once again. Okay, so let's execute line number 19. Again I want to access, or I want to call method A, but now I want to call method A with respect to T object. So currently I'm inside method B, and inside method B, T basically indicating Bada memory location. That means I'm calling method A with respect to Bada object. That means inside this Bada memory location, this method A will be called once again. Okay. So this, I have to update this column once again. But now while calling the method, I am passing y. So what is y here? Y is basically the local variable of method B. Okay, from as I have called method A inside method B, that means y will be definitely the local y, which is 2. So I have passed 2, and this 2 will be stored inside the local variable x of method A. So that means I have to update this column. Okay, so the current value of x will be 2. Okay, so now I have to execute this 4 lines again. So let's execute the first line. Okay, one more thing, as I have called a method A, we need to know what is this here. Okay, I have called method A with respect to T, and T was basically Bada memory location. That means inside method A, if we call this is basically the Bada memory. So this dot y means the y of Bada location, that means this 11. I want to update this instance variable y. Okay. Then how will I update it? X plus this dot y. Okay, so currently I'm inside method A, and I have a local variable x which is currently 2. 2 plus this dot y is 11, 2 plus 11 is 13, and 13 plus the static x, and static x is 3, so 13 plus 3 is 16. So 16 will be stored inside the instance variable y. Okay, so let's execute the next line. X equals to this dot z plus 4. X is the local x, this dot z is 4, and 4 plus 4 is 8. That means it will be 8. Okay, then line number 13, trace task dot x, that means the static x. This dot x, this dot y minus x. So this dot y is currently 16, and x is currently 8. So 16 minus 8 will be 8. That means the static value of the static variable is currently 8. So let's print our second output, y, this dot y, and trace x. Okay, so y a first x obviously the local x, which is currently 8. So the first output is 8, then this dot y is currently 16, and lastly the static variable, which is also 8. Okay, so I have executed method A. That means I need to go back to that position where method A was called. So this is the line where method is being called. That means I have to execute line number 20. Okay, so whenever I'm executing line number 20, that means I am inside method B once again. I am inside method B of Bada location. Okay, so this dot x, currently I'm inside this position, this portion, or this scope. So inside this scope, I want to access this dot x. So do I have any instance x? No, I don't have any instance x. So we know that if we don't have any instance x, we can call the static variable using the this keyword. So this dot x is basically the static variable. I want to update the static variable. Okay, then t dot y, t is basically Bada location. Bada dot y means 16 here. 16 plus this dot z, and this dot z is currently 2. That means 16 plus 2 is 18, and this 18 will be stored inside the static x. Okay, then this is the last output, I guess. This dot x is basically 2. So the output will be 2. Then t dot, okay, this dot z is basically 2. So the first output of the third row is 2. Then z, t dot z, t is Bada এর z বলছি, so Bada এর z কত আছে 4. Then lastly y, I have a local y inside method B, which is 2. So this is the third output. Okay, then let's return this dot x, and again I don't have any instance x, so definitely this dot x is my static variable. So I am returning 18. Where it will return it, we know that if a method returns something, the return value will be stored where the method is being called. That means 18 will be stored inside the res variable. So we have already created a column for the res variable. So the current value of the res variable is 18. Okay, so let's print our last output. At first you have to print the value of res, which is 18, then trace task dot 8, which is 18 once again. So the second output will be 18 once again, and lastly t1 dot z. So t1 is basically Badda, and Badda dot z is basically 4. So these are the overall outputs of this tracing. So from this tracing we saw that actually we can access the static variable. Sometimes we access the static variable just by using x, or sometimes we access the static variable with respect to this, and we have also accessed the static variable with the reference of this t. Okay, so it is not mandatory to mention the static variable with respect to the name of the class, but we can access the static variable with respect to that object or with